What President Obama gets wrong about deal-making is that he constantly applies pressure to our friends and rewards our enemies. But when the United States stands with Israel, the chances of peace really rise, and rises exponentially. That's what will happen when Donald Trump is president of the United States. We will move the American embassy to the eternal capital of the Jewish people, Jerusalem.
Wanted to know what the Matrix is, Neo? Trinity? Try to relax. This will feel a little weird. This is the construct. It's our loading program. We can load anything from clothing to equipment, weapons, training simulations, anything we need.
Right now, we're inside a computer program?
Is it really so hard to believe? Your clothes are different, the plugs in your arms and head are gone. Your hair has changed. Your appearance now is what we call residual self-image. It is the mental projection of your digital self.
This isn't real.
What is real? How do you define real? If you're talking about what you can feel, what you can smell, what you can taste and see, then real is simply electrical signals interpreted by your brain. This is the world that you know. The world as it was at the end of the 20th century. It exists now only as part of a neural interactive simulation that we call the Matrix. You've been living in a dream world, Neo. This is the world as it exists today.
But Governor Cuomo's move has a huge symbolic and political effect because New York has the largest number of Jewish residents outside Israel. I'm Marcia Kramer, CBS 2 News.
The BDS movement is more than a decade old, but officials say they're worried because of the increase in anti-Semitic incidents, especially on American college campuses.
While his family life may have been on the rocks, his business empire was crumbling.
The headline was quite accurate. Welcome to the 90s, Donald. Because it was like he got whacked right in the face. It was amazing.
Trump opened his third casino in Atlantic City in April 1990.
Lasers, fireworks, and miles of neon lights provided the color as Trump opened the Taj Mahal Casino Hotel in Atlantic City.
But just months after it opened, the Taj Mahal missed one of its debt payments, and Trump began looking for a bailout.
His empire could be at risk of collapse if the New Jersey Casino Commission decides not to approve Trump's bailout plan.
By the fall of 1991, all three casinos had filed for bankruptcy.
The New Jersey Casino Control Commission has unanimously approved Donald Trump's bailout plan. That plan allows him to use his three Atlantic City casinos as collateral for a $65 million loan.
In order to finance a loan, Trump was forced to sell off his airline, his yacht, and a chunk of one of his earliest projects, the Grand Hyatt Hotel in Manhattan.
You know, I had a wife who was suing me for $2 billion. I had the banks, I had this, I had that.
He did get to keep one asset, an undeveloped piece of land on Manhattan's west side that Trump had purchased in 1985. Trump had envisioned a huge project on the site, but in 1994, the real estate market fell, leaving Trump unable to make payments on the land. So Trump sold off the lots and made a deal where he got to keep some of the profits from any future development, and to put his name on a few of the buildings, marking a new chapter in which Trump was less of a developer and more of a brand.
Who knows better about hard times than me? I had a company, it was doing well, I had tremendous debt like this country, And in 1990, the whole country, it just went very, very bad.
As his finances stabilized, Trump began to reclaim his status in the public psyche with publicity stunts like a 1995 Pizza Hut commercial in which he appeared with Ivana Trump.
Doing, Ivana?
What will people think?
It's wrong, isn't it?
But it feels so right.
Then it's a deal?
By the end of the decade, he was once again sounding like the Trump of the 80s, talking big about his finances.
Back in the 1990s, you owed something like $900 million. Your empire was pretty
much more than that.
You owed more than that?
975 was personally guaranteed. That was just the small part. That was the harder debt. But I owed many, many billions of dollars. And now my company is much bigger and stronger than it was in the 80s.
And flirting with a presidential run.
Businessman Donald Trump tells Meet the Press that tomorrow he, Trump, is also leaving the Republican Party to join the Reform Party.
He's considered the largest developer in New York.
In 1999, Trump was on the verge of doing something that he had only hinted at in the 80s. He was about to decide whether he could really run for the White House.
Running mate. If you decide to go at this, who would be the ideal running mate for Donald Trump?
Oh, I think Oprah would be great.
Seriously?
I think that probably that would be serious.
Because he personally guaranteed so much debt, the leverage shifted dramatically over to the banks, because it was no longer an issue of a bank and a piece of real estate. It was a bank in Donald Trump's actual survival.
Trump owed money all over town to 72 banks in all. Pomerantz represented them as a group.
How close was he to going personally bankrupt?
Very.
Trump makes a point of saying he never went personally bankrupt. But there's a reason why the banks decided to keep Trump whole.
We made the decision that he would be worth more alive to us than dead. Dead meaning in bankruptcy. We don't want him to be in bankruptcy. We want him out in the world selling these assets for us.
So you wanted him alive because he was a salesman and could best sell his own properties?
That's correct. We kept him alive to help us.
Mr. Grady, you were the caretaker here. I recognize you. I saw your picture in the newspapers. You, chopped your wife and daughter up into little bits. And, then you blew your brains out.
That's strange, sir. I don't have any recollection of that at all.
Mr. Grady, you were the caretaker here.
I'm sorry to differ with you, sir. But you are the caretaker. You've always been the caretaker. I should know, sir. I've always been here. Did you know, Mr. Torrance, that your son is attempting to bring an outside party into this situation? Did you know that?
No.
He is, Mr. Torrance.
Who?
A nigger.
A nigger?
A nigger cook. Your son has a very great talent. I don't think you are aware how great it is. But he is attempting to use that very talent against your will. indeed he is, Mr. Torrance. A very willful boy. A rather naughty boy, if I may be so bold, sir.
It's his mother. She interferes.
Perhaps they need a good talking to, if you don't mind my saying so. Perhaps a bit more. My girls, they didn't care for the Overlook at first. One of them actually stole a pack of matches and tried to burn it down. But I corrected them, sir. And when my wife tried to prevent me from doing my duty, I corrected her.
I speak to you today as a lifelong supporter and true friend of Israel. I'm a newcomer to politics, but not to backing the Jewish state. I came here to speak to you about where I stand on the future of American relations with our strategic ally, our unbreakable friendship, and our cultural brother, the only democracy in the Middle East, the State of Israel. My number one priority is to dismantle the disastrous deal with Iran. Iran has already, since the deal is in place, test-fired ballistic missiles 3 times. Painted on those missiles, in both Hebrew and Farsi, were the words, "Israel must be wiped off the face of the earth." You can forget that. The United Nations is not a friend of democracy. It's not a friend to freedom. It's not a friend even to the United States of America, where, as you know, it has its home. And it surely is not a friend to Israel.
The UN body charged with preserving world heritage. Now, this is hard to believe, but UNESCO just denied the 4,000-year connection between the Jewish people and its holiest site, the Temple Mount. That's just as absurd as denying the connection between the Great Wall of China and China. Ladies and gentlemen, the UN, begun as a moral force, has become a moral farce. So when it comes to Israel at the UN, you'd probably think nothing will ever change, right? Well, think again. You see, everything will change, and a lot sooner than you think. The change will happen in this hall because back home, your governments are rapidly changing their attitudes towards Israel. And sooner or later, that's going to change the way you vote on Israel.
International law. In fact, the Zionist Israeli government does not have a right to exist. Why? Because the partition plan that was brought before the General Assembly, the partition plan which was supposed to divide the land between the Israeli Zionist Jewish population and the Palestinian population, was supposed to go to the Security Council for approval. It never went to the Security Council for approval. It was a recommendation. So under international law, the Zionist colonization of Palestine is not legal, and therefore the Zionist structures, the government and otherwise, do not have a right to exist. And that's not to conflate the people with the state. Those people who identify as Israeli, just as any human beings, have every right to exist. However, those who seek to maintain a an Arab minority in a land that is natively Arab, not just Palestine. When we talk about Israel, we have to think about where Palestine is. Palestine sits at the heart of the Arab world. The maintenance of an Israeli state that is not Arab ends the liberties, controls the liberties, affects the daily lives of all Arabs in the Arab world. Furthermore, when we talk about, Israel's right to exist, people say oftentimes they refer to the 67 borders as though somehow it is written that when you discuss two states, the 67 borders are what we're to discuss. Nowhere is it written. It's an arbitrary date picked on the date of another occupation. It could have been 48 or 49 or 47 or 2001. So there's nowhere that it says that we have to stick to the green line or the 67 borders. Firstly. Secondly, addressing the issue of the 67 borders, if we are to say that Israel as a Jewish Zionist state or as a purely Jewish state, a state for the minority in the land of the majority native Palestinians, in order to affect that state, you'd have to continue the structures and mechanisms of oppression that gave birth to Israel. Population control, exile, a complete negation of the rights, the fundamental rights of 2/3 of the Palestinian population, the refugees, who surround Israel. And I support Jodi's position and would take it a step further that the two-state solution, proposals for the two-state solution are actually dying. And where we see the advocacy for two-state solution is amongst the Zionist liberals who want to save, at least ideologically, this idea of a Zionist Jewish state. So it's not realistic. Even in the settlements, the settlers in Palestine talk about a one-state solution. There's only one state now if you look at the map. There is no contiguous Palestinian state. There is only one state. Now, the issue for us, and I would like to pose, I'm sorry for going on too long, is as organizers and as this movement is exponentially growing by the day, and it's very exciting that we keep this in mind and not debate the issue of whether it's one or two states. The idea of two states is absolutely impossible, but rather what model of one state in Palestine do we want to see?
Well,